and welcome to another episode of Finders Keepers, the podcast that helps you find the best keepers for your keeper and dynasty leagues. I'm your host Jordox, and round 14 of the AFL season was potentially season defining for a few clubs. It was nowhere near the spectacle of round 3, how could it have been? But there were some statements made. Starting on Thursday night when I ventured over to Marvel Stadium to watch my Crows make a big statement in a dominant victory over the Bulldogs. The Cats kept their spot in the top 4 just after holding off the Suns in an important victory. North bounced back to win a thriller against West Coast and keep their top 10 chances alive. The Swans held on to equal top spot by pipping the power, and St Kilda jumped into 10th with a classic 8-point game against GWS. The Pies, Blues, Hawks and Dockers all had the bye and returned to action this week. And as we head into round 15, the ladder is starting to take its final form. Exciting times ahead. My weekend was pretty good. I thoroughly enjoyed the footy on Thursday night. I thought we'd be pretty good, the Crows. I didn't expect such a performance, but it was very enjoyable. Fantasy-wise, things went okay. You know, I play in so many leagues. It's always a mixed bag. It's not very often you get a full sweep of victories. But crucially, in my home league, Finders Keepers, I did get a nice win, which has put me equal 4th in 5th spot. Now, a win this week and another result going my way, and I will finally be sitting in 4th spot. The only problem, I'm playing against the back-to-back reigning champ, so wish me luck. On to the episode, and this week on Finders Keepers, I'll give you my top waiver picks, have a quick look at the names I put up last week, then I'll run through the things I noticed across the round, from a keeper league perspective of course, then I'll finish off the podcast with a question from you, the listeners. So last week, because of the timing of the episode, with it coming out after the waiver wires had sort of gone through in most leagues, I didn't do a full list of names, but I did give 3 names just to keep an eye on, and I'll just have a quick look at how they went. The first guy, well, he didn't even play. He was on the bye, so great advice, Jordox. But Pat Voss, I mentioned last week, his ownership was at 36%, coming off a massive 124, but a 4-week average of 92, averaging 4 goals a game. So he's really hit his straps. He's just had the bye. He's up to 42% ownership now, and those ownership numbers cover off all keeper and dynasty leagues on the Keeper Fantasy platform. Another guy I sort of mentioned with a bit of interest was Sam De Koning for the Cats. He'd scored a 90 the week before playing as a ruck. His ownership went from 36% to 47%, but he was back to his regular role in the back line with a little bit of pinch hitting in the ruck. He scored a 56, and if you did jump on, you could probably let him go again. And the last name I mentioned last week was Artie Jones for the Bulldogs. He was owned in 13% of leagues, and I really liked him coming off a 66, but it was a game that saw him move up the ground and play a bit more on the wing. This week, his ownership went up to 14%. He scored 54, but he played the similar role coming up the ground. Not a lot of Bulldogs stood up on the night, so 54 is not a great score, but the role looked the same, and he kicked a couple of really nice goals to go with it. So for this week, the names I'm going to put forward for the waivers, they're pretty much young guys, at least in the first list. So I've got 4 names for regular leagues, and then I've got a few names for the deeper leagues as well. The first name, I was really surprised to see his ownership at 67%, which is high, but that means 23% of leagues he's available on the waivers this week. And to you, I say, grab him. It's Joel Fitzgerald for Melbourne. Came in with some pretty big raps as a guy who can find the pill in the mid-season draft a few weeks ago. Had a couple of dominant performances in the VFL, collecting lots of the footy. And finally got his go this week against Essendon, and he scored an 83 with 26 touches on debut, with plenty of time on the ball in the middle at the CBAs. So absolutely put a claim in for Fitzgerald. The next guy is also from the mid-season draft a few weeks ago, and I'm surprised his ownership sits at 53%, and it's Hugo Hall-Kahan, the Adelaide halfback rebounder who's now played 2 games, scored 75 on the weekend, and it was the sort of game where, lots of Crows scored well, but he looks really good in his spot at halfback. He's very clean with the ball, and I actually loved his game the week before against Geelong, where he got hit pretty hard in the head, came back on, and his physical side helped the Crows win. So he's got defender and mid status. He's going to be in the side for a while, and I really like him, so go and grab him. Next one is one of the many, many Suns Academy players, and that's Jai Murray, who I was a little surprised to see him debut the week before last, and I watched the Gold Coast game this week. He looked really good on the wing, scored 79, and he's owned in 52% of leagues. So he's worth a go as well. And then the fourth guy for this list, I've got Matt Johnson from Freo, currently owned in 57% of leagues. Scored a 91 in round 12 before a minor hamstring issue, and then he missed, and then they had the bye. But he's trained this week already, and he's a pretty good chance to be in for the Geelong game. He's averaging 79 in his last 3. He's similar to Erasmus, these two guys that have sort of been on the fringes of the on-ball brigade at Freo for a while, but they've got fantasy in them. I like Johnson. I think he's played most of the games this year, and even though Hayden Young's back, Caleb Sarong may be back, so Johnson may get pushed out again, he's still a likely type, and I think he's worth having a crack. Now, for the deeper leagues, I got 3 names, and the first one I'm really excited about, and it's Job Shanahan for West Coast. Owned in 18% of leagues. I actually had him on this list a few weeks ago, but I'm putting him in again because he scored a 79, had a bit of a role change, and I'll go into more detail when I go through that game, but he added another string to his bow, and it's got me excited. He's got the bye this week, obviously keep that in mind. The next guy is Zach Taylor from the Crows, owned in 17% of leagues. He scored 83 against the Bulldogs, and that's, like I said, a lot of Crows scored well, but he's actually been going okay. 70 average in his last 5, and he's really consolidated his spot in the Crows' best 23. He's been around for a bit now. I reckon he could end up in the midfield. For now, he's a half-forward flanker, but he's doing a really good job, and he could easily slot in to a forward line in a deep league. And then the last guy is Blake Howes from Melbourne, owned in 13% of leagues. He scored 91 on the weekend, and he's averaging 60 for the year, but he has shown good scoring pedigree in the right role. And with guys like Christian Salem, Xavier Lindsay, still weeks away from returning, looks like he's getting a bit of a go in that halfback role, and a 91 on the weekend shows what he can do. So they're my waiver picks for the week. 4 regular guys and then 3 for the deeper leagues. Good luck. Hopefully you grab one of these guys and you're glad you listened. All right, let's get into the things I noticed across round 15, starting all the way back on Thursday night with the Bulldogs and the Crows at Marvel. And as I mentioned from the top, I was at this game, and it was a lot of fun, particularly that first quarter when it was just raining goals, even though the roof was shut. For the Bulldogs, a bit of a down night for them, not a lot to get excited about. But I will say Connor Buderick bounced back. He was very quiet the week before. He scored 78 in this game, and obviously much better. But I just wanted to comment on watching. When you go to a game, you see players live. Sometimes you see things you don't always pick up on the TV. Buderick to me is a really good player. Like, that's what I took away from it. Watching him live, the way he follows up from contest to contest to try and get the handball receive and stay in the play. He looks like a gun. A really good sort of backup to Bailey Dale, who, he's years away from retiring. But just another 1-2 punch for Dale and Buderick together. For the Crows, Hugo Hall-Kahan, I spoke about him earlier, 23 touches, just looking very much at home at the AFL level, scoring a 75. Jake Saligo continues to I think he's starting to build again. His CBAs have increased again this week. He scored 92, and he's just been building nicely the last few weeks. Had an equal team high 8 tackles, and I think he's going to continue to build and become a lot closer to the 90 guy he was at the start of last year, and he's picked up that forward status. So it could be a really sweet hold for those who've still got him, and anyone who jumped on him and traded him in through his quiet patch could be handsomely rewarded. Now, speaking of handsome, Jordan Dawson, what that's a weird thing to say. What an absolute superstar. I just wanted to mention him. It's not a lot of relevance to keeper leagues. You've either got him and you're laughing or you don't. But what a performance from the Crows captain. 32 touches, 7 marks, 8 tackles, 3 goals, and a 156. A massive first quarter. He'd kicked all 3 goals in that huge first quarter, and he'd already tonned up by halftime. It's quite incredible what this guy is doing, and that's 6 tons in a row now for him. He's making a bit of a charge for the Brownlow, I reckon. Friday night footy was Geelong and Gold Coast down at GMHBA Stadium. And this was a really important game for the Cats. They needed to win to avoid losing 3 in a row. And, equally important for Gold Coast to get a bit of a scalp and get their season back on track. And I thought it was a pretty good game for the most part. I thought the Gold Coast really took it up to Geelong, and the margin blew out in the end. But there was a pretty important win for Geelong because Gold Coast were pretty good, and the Cats held them off and won quite easily in the end. Now, some names that stood out, some good, some bad. Tanner Bruhn, that was his worst score of the season with a 45. He had just 11 touches, looked like he was playing on the wing. He had no centre bounce, centre ball up attendances, even with Jack Bowes, who came out as a late change. It's a bit of a weird one with Bruhn. It looked like they were going to settle him on the half-back flank at the start of the year. He was looking really good there. Certainly from a fantasy perspective, it was ideal. But we've seen him play on the ball, and I reckon he looks great as a midfielder. We've seen him play a little bit forward as well. He's kind of like Geelong's Colby McKercher. Different types of players, but just the way the club are using this guy, sometimes half-back, sometimes midfield, sometimes a bit forward. And, this week he was on the wing and he looked quite lost. So, not sure it's hard to predict what happens next with Bruhn, but I think he's a really good midfielder. I reckon they should put him back there. Shannon Neal came up with his best score of the season with 95. That was thanks to 9 marks, 5 tackles, a couple of goals, a couple of important goals too from memory, and he really stood up. He's just a very nice player to watch, guy that's developing before our eyes. For Gold Coast, Ned Moyle. Now, I spoke about him last week, and I told owners, just hold on, don't stress that the scores aren't there yet, because this is going to be his ruck spot alone eventually. And a week later, Jared Witts was omitted, so there you go. Moyle ruck solo, scored 86, and that was without taking a mark. So you can see what the ceiling is going to be for this guy. Witts absolutely dominated in the VFL, as one would expect. And I don't think we've seen the last of him clearly, so he will be back at some point. But certainly the future's looking very bright for Ned Moyle. Jai Murray really stood out in this game as well. This was only game 2 of his career. as I mentioned earlier with the waivers, I was a little surprised he debuted last week, but geez, he looked good in this game. 19 touches, 7 marks, playing on the wing. Really impressive game. Looking forward to watching him go around again. And Bailey Humphrey is having a really bad run at the moment. He's really struggling. He scored 21 in this game, which is obviously dreadful, but he's been struggling for a while now. And I just wonder if maybe he gets a run in the VFL this week and that maybe that'd be a good thing for him. Not sure what's happening with his contract and, the off-season, the talk of him still wanting to get to a Melbourne club and Gold Coast are going to dig their heels in. The reality is he needs to find some form, and that might have to be in the VFL. On to Saturday now, and Melbourne took on Essendon. And the last time these two played, Essendon had a really big win. I think that might have been their last win, actually. So Melbourne were always going to be very keen on setting the record straight, and they were pretty dominant from start to finish, from what I could tell. I didn't watch this game, but it did seem to be Melbourne's day. They had young Joel Fitzgerald debut. He had 61% CBAs, just completely taking Caleb Windsor's spot, who was out. And yeah, like I said at the start, 26 touches on debut is pretty good with an 83 fantasy score. So what happens when Windsor returns? They've been pretty adamant that Caleb Windsor's playing as an on-baller this year, so I assume he goes back into the mix. But whatever the case, Fitzgerald's spot in the side is safe for now. And yeah, I think those that grabbed him after hearing his VFL numbers will be very happy with that debut indeed. Trent Rivers put up his first fantasy ton in 10 games, thanks to 10 marks and a goal from half-back. So this was really pleasing. I'm a long-time owner of Trent Rivers, and yeah, it was a bit of a concern the start of the year, and then he was dropped, then he was out injured for ages, and his scoring just hasn't looked like what we want from him. So good to see a ton from him, but I'd like to see him back it up next week. And the last Melbourne guy is Blake Howes, who I spoke about earlier. He scored a 91 and yeah, clearly just benefited from the Demons' dominance of the ball in this game. But I don't mind Howes. I think he's got some nice halfback chops and he's starting to show it. For the Bombers, Zach Merritt kept that halfback role as, it was expected he would during the week. But then he moved into the middle in the second quarter. Now, this was strange timing for me because this is when Archie Roberts went off injured and Jackson Pryor actually got moved back after starting on the wing to cover Roberts. So I guess Merritt going from halfback to the middle was probably nothing to do with Roberts, but it's just really weird. Obviously, Melbourne was smashing them out of the middle, I'm guessing, and they put Merritt in. It's like they just didn't persevere with Merritt at halfback for very long. After all week, it sounded like, no, that's where we're playing him. Anyway, whatever the case, Merritt, he's a beast. He scores wherever he plays, and he put up a 123 just to keep that season average ticking along nicely. Will Setterfield also continued his good scoring form. He collected 34 touches, and he attended 91% of the centre ball ups, which is a pretty huge number and pretty good, because I think his first game back a few weeks ago, he spent a lot of time on the wing, and Essendon have just said, nah, you're a in and under centre ball up guy. And he scored 123 as well, which is very nice. Saturday Twilight, was it Twilight? Saturday Arvo, whatever it was, later on Saturday, North played West Coast in the second of their 2 home games in a row in Perth that North have got this year. And last week they got annihilated by Freo, so they had to bring it this week, and they did. And it was a good contest, and West Coast were pretty unlucky not to win it at the end, but North held on. And yeah, very entertaining game of footy. Tristan Sherry. Now, he's such an interesting guy at the minute. It was a really nice return to scoring. He scored 110. I think he laid 8 tackles. So back to the Cherry we love. But there's this very strange ruck setup that they've got at North. And I spoke about it last week. It's continued, but it's getting even more odd. So, well, not odd. There's logic to it. So Cherry attended just 25% of centre ball ups, which is a massive, that just keeps dropping. It's all the way down to 25% now. Cooper Trenbath and the debutant Taylor Goad took most of the centre ball up ruck contests, but then they'd immediately slide forward and Tristan Sherry would come up and be the ruckman for the contests around the ground. So I saw it happen so many times. Goad would take the ball up, there'd be a stoppage, kicked out, whatever, and then Goad runs forward and Cherry swaps and plays as a midfielder. Really interesting. And, clearly because Trenbath and Goad, they think they're better at jumping for the centre ball ups, which are a different sort of ruck contest to the ones around the ground, I guess. Yeah, anyway, as a Cherry owner, I'm still not entirely comfortable with the setup, but I'll take his 110 and be thankful for that. Now, Colby McKercher played on the ball last week and then this week was sent out to the wing. He had 12 touches, no marks, scored 51, and I don't know, does he maybe need a run in the twos? Because there's obviously something that he's not doing that they're not happy with, because they don't keep him in the one position. If he's at half back, he's there for a week or two, then he's at half forward for a week or two. Last week he got thrown on the ball, and I thought looked okay. And this week he's been shunted out to a wing. So, yeah, I don't know. It's very frustrating. As someone that owns him, I just want him to be playing half-back or on the ball. Please. Now, West Coast. Job Shanahan. Let me talk about this guy. I mentioned him a few weeks ago as a guy I just think whenever I watch West Coast, he stands out to me as a big forward that can clunk a good mark. But this week, he was doing nothing. In fact, to half-time, he just had 2 handballs, and that was it. Then in the third game, West Coast put him behind the ball as the loose man in defence, not for the whole quarter, but for periods of the quarter, and he looked excellent. He reads the play so well. He then took the confidence he got from playing in that role back to the forward line where he was much better. He took 8 marks in the second half and scored 71 points. So his total was 79. Big second half, obviously nothing in the first. So just something to take note of as being a really good, just an extra little asset for a key forward that they can. They used to do that. Carlton did that with Charlie Curnow at times, where they just put him behind the ball late in quarters if they weren't to slow the game down. Looks like Shanahan's going to be that guy. So great opportunity for him to get fantasy points, even if it's a game where he's not really getting a lot of opportunities forward. Elijah Hewitt returned for his first game since round 6. He had 16 touches, took 5 marks in 64% time on ground and scored 68. So it's pretty good. But importantly, he was used as a CBA mid in the rotation there. So we want him on the ball, and he was on the ball in parts of this game. And finally, Milan Murdoch, he scored 42, so this wasn't his day for scoring, but another shutdown job completed successfully. This time he went to Caleb Daniel, kept him to just 15 touches and 1 mark. So Murdoch is developing quite the CV and has had a number of scalps now as that half forward tagging the rebounding half-back defender. Saturday night was Port Adelaide and Sydney, and yeah, this was a great game too. Port could have won it. They should have won it. They really should have, but Sydney haven't been at their best for a few weeks now, and they're still finding ways to win, which is what great sides do. But I did feel for Port. I mean, they've had a lot of losses by under a kick this year. And, yeah, the ladder and their wins and losses doesn't probably tell the story of how good Josh Carr's going, I reckon, in his first year. The first guy I want to talk about for Port Adelaide is Joe Richards. And he's someone who I was very big on in pre-season. I ended up drafting him in pretty much every league I'm in. And I really liked what I saw from him in parts last year as a half forward who gets up the ground and links the play. The last few weeks, though, he's been starting to see some time on the ball. And this week, he attended 67% of the centre ball ups. And this was the second week in a row. He was actually the main midfielder used for Port after Butters and Horne-Francis. He scored 107 in this game, did Richards, and he's averaging 95 in his last 3. So he's looking very good at the minute. Xavier Bammett debuted. He's another one of the mid-season draftees from a few weeks ago who's already suited up in the big stuff. And I thought he had a real crack. He looked like a real goer. He played, I think, mostly on the wing, kicked a goal, scored 53. Commentators kept referring to him as Bam Bam, so it's going to be pretty hard to see that not being his nickname. But, he impressed me. I thought it was a solid debut, and he should keep his spot for sure. Jordan Sweet has worked his way into the season nicely. I mean, you got to remember, before round 1, he'd lost his spot to Dante Vicentini. And it wasn't long before he was back in the side. And, yeah, he's just building nicely. He more than held his own in this game against Brodie Grundy. He actually out-rucked him, hit-outs-wise. He had less touches than Grundy, but he did kick 2 goals. So, yeah, I think it was a pretty even matchup between the two. And Sweet scored 98, and he gave away... he had 8 frees against Sweet, which is... that's a lot. So that's what 24 points cost him. So that would have been a 122 if he kept his hands to himself. For Sydney, Callum Mills had his first ton of the season with a 107, and he moved up the ground a bit more this week, played a bit more like a midfielder. Didn't attend any centre ball ups, but it did feel like he was pushing right up the ground. And yeah, first ton of the season, and he's been a bit underwhelming this year, and hopefully this is a sign of some bigger scores from him for the run home. There weren't any real change to the centre ball ups with Justin McInerney out. I wondered if there'd be any big shift there or if someone else would get an opportunity, maybe a Mills. But no, it was more of the same. There were a few more for Angus Sheldrick and heaps more for James Jordan because he was tagging Zach Butters. And lastly, Logan McDonald, he played on the wing at times in this game. A fair bit of it, actually. He was up on the wing. He scored 85, kicked 3 goals, went forward. But yeah, quite interesting to see the Swans using, a key forward like him up the ground on a wing, although we are seeing a little bit of that in the competition this year. Just the 2 games on Sunday to round out the round. And the first one was Richmond and Brisbane. And this was played at Ninja Stadium in Hobart in Tasmania. And I didn't catch any of this game, but it looked to go pretty much according to the script. Brisbane too good for the young Tigers. Some interesting scores and names though. Sam Banks, a nice return to scoring for last year's big breakout star. He got a 97. Now, my first thought when I saw his score was he must be back at half-back again, but his heat map suggests he was playing wing still, just with bits and pieces at half-back. So I think Banks owners would be pretty keen on seeing him start to slowly go back to being a permanent half-back, like he was in the back end of last year when he was breaking out. Jasper Olga had a really good game. He kicked 4 goals, 1, and I saw he was matched up on Darcy Gardner for most of the game, who has a good 11 centimetres on him. So a good effort from Olga to kick the 4 goals. He actually got the Rising Star nomination this week. And what was his score in the end? Of 75. So pretty good stuff. For Brisbane, Will Ashcroft had an absolute day out. It was a career high fantasy score for him with 152. He got there with 38 touches, 10 marks, and kicked 2 goals, 3. Not really much else to be said about him. We know he's building into a superstar if he's not already there. But good to see a nice big 150 score from him. And lastly, Darcy Wilmot. I'm just going to keep talking about him because he keeps doing it. Another ton without Zorko. He got 105. And in the 5 weeks without Zorko, Wilmot's now averaging 108. Very impressive. And this was actually the 7th time this season Wilmot has recorded 20 plus kicks in a game. Very nice numbers. And then the last game, St Kilda held on against GWS at Marvel in a really important win for them. Liam Ryan stood out for the Saints. He's not a fantasy guy, but had to give him a mention. He kicked 6 goals, 2 from 9 kicks. It's incredibly efficient forward craft from Ryan, and he scored a 95. For the Giants, I want to talk about Brent Daniels' game, and I may have got this guy a touch wrong. I did not see him going on the ball and becoming a midfielder like this. I knew he'd be a guy that can score, but just he's been so inconsistent with injuries and whatnot. But he's had bulk CBAs for the last 3 weeks. He's averaging 96. In this game, he had 31 touches, and that's the first time he's had over 30 touches in 119 career games. And like I said, that 3-game average of 96 with the bulk CBAs, these are the percentages in the last 3 for his CBAs. 77%, 71%, and then 84% on the weekend. So it's really interesting. And they're loving what Brent Daniels is doing on the ball. And he's pretty undersized. He's a bit like Joe Richards, actually. Not very tall at all, the two of them, but playing on the ball at the moment. The Saints continued their reputation for allowing big scores to running defenders. The usual suspects, the 2 Lockies, Whitfield and Ash, combined for 63 touches, 15 marks, and took 100% of the side's kick-ins. But Joe Fonte joined in with 27 touches, 10 marks, and a first fantasy ton to go with it. Lastly, Kieran Briggs is looking much better lately, and he really had to, because he's only back in the side because young Nick Madden got injured. But he's doing all right now, Briggsy. He's averaging 86 in his last 5, scored 97 in this game. And yeah, he's slowly building back to... he's putting up the numbers now that I expected of him. And yeah, he's still pretty young too, Briggs. So I think he can still be pretty good. Where's Madden? Madden's still like 4 or 5 weeks away. So Briggs got a good opportunity to finish the year and really consolidate as the number 1 big man at the Giants. And they're the things that caught my attention across round 14 from a keeper league perspective, of course. We'll jump into, I've got the one question from the listeners this week, and then I'll wrap up what's been a short, sharp, and hopefully quite shiny episode of Finders Keepers. But before I do that, just a reminder, if you are enjoying the podcast, please do me a favour, go and like, subscribe, leave a 5-star rating, leave a comment, some feedback, anything you want to do there for me on wherever you're listening, whether it be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or even those listening on YouTube. Also, don't forget to get in touch with me on X at FindKeepAFL, and you can send through any questions you have on keeper leagues, draft leagues, anything fantasy, anything footy. Send me a message, drop me a line, and you can also put through trades that have gone through in your leagues. You want me to give my analytical take on them. So that's at FindKeepAFL on X. All right, let's jump into the question. It's come from Tyler Finlay. That's at Wary Pels fan on X. And he says, hey mate, just curious on your thoughts. If you're willing, I'm in a cash keeper league with a team I believe is good, but through injuries, it just hasn't happened for me this season, and I'm sitting second to bottom. We don't play with free agency open, so the draft at the start of the year has some good options left over. My question is, should I try to sell high on Noble? I can't get into the top 4 this year, and he's having a stellar year. I just don't know if he keeps it up. But if he does, then he could be invaluable next season when I've got a healthy list. Would love to hear your thoughts, whether through message or on the pod. Love your work. Cheers. So it's a great question, Tyler, and it's such a it's a battle we've all had where you've got a guy in such a rich vein of form. He is so hot at the minute, Noble, that part of you thinks I should sell while the price is so high. But then, well, what if this is kind of real? I don't want to sell him. I want these scores in my team, particularly for next year. So it's a tricky one, but for me, the position you've just described, I'd be selling high. I'd be selling him right now because I don't think what he's doing is sustainable. And yeah, that's obvious. He's averaging 118 in his last 5. And what did he do last year? He went at 91. So he has been pretty damn good for the Suns. But look, he's 29, and I don't think this is going to continue. I think they're going to have to change something. The Suns aren't exactly playing very well at the minute, and Noble is just racking it up. Kind of reminds me of the 5 or 6 week run we saw from Archie Roberts at the start of the year. Now, he's not someone I would have recommended trading out while the going's good because he's so young and he's got a whole career ahead of him. With Noble at 29, the Suns not really playing the way they'd like, and with many other options, halfback guys at the Suns, I just can't see this lasting. And I think, if you're going to trade him, do it now. Do it this week. We're so fickle, keeper players, coaches. Someone, you look at his score 2 weeks ago, Noble had gone 144, 135, 126, and then 69. If you tried to sell him after the 69, we're always caught up in the most recent score, whether we admit it or not. Since the 69, he's gone 146 and now a 113 against the Cats. Do it now, because if he drops a 70, which he could well do, the price just drops. So if you can sell him this week, you can ask for, obviously not anything, but you can ask for quite a lot. And that's what I'd be doing, because the chances of him doing this again next year when your side is healthy again, look, it's possible, but he'll be 30, and I just don't see it happening with the Suns needing to change the way they're playing. So let me know how you go. Would love to know if you get a trade done for him. If you do go ahead with it, Tyler, be interested to see who you can get. But good luck. Thank you for the question. And yeah, thanks for supporting the pod. And with that, I will close out the pod. A shorter one this week, but still plenty of interesting things to watch for and consider as we approach round 15 and the back end of season 2026. Thanks for listening. I'll be back again next week to make sense of everything that transpires over the weekend. Good luck for round 15. I hope you get some juicy W's and that you're starting to prepare your sides for a tilt at the Premiership. Chat to you then. But in the meantime, I'm Jordox. This has been Finders Keepers. And until next time, keep on keeping on.